Montana Territory, September 1878. The wind howled through the one-street town of Dovetail as Naomi Zeller stepped out of the pawnshop, her arms empty and her heart heavier than it had ever been. She had just traded the last thing of value. She owned her late husband's silver watch for a sack of flour, a pound of beans, and a small tin of lard. It would feed her daughter for a week, maybe. After that, she had no idea. She crossed the dirt road, her boots worn thin at the soles, and pushed open the door to the boarding house where she rented a cramped room. The wood creaked beneath her weight. Upstairs, her 4-year-old daughter, Sadie, sat on the edge of the narrow bed with her legs dangling and her cheeks flushed. "Mama," Sadie said, voice small. "Did you find food?" Naomi forced a smile and nodded, laying the bundle on the table. "We will eat tonight, sweetheart." Sadie clapped her hands, and Naomi turned away quickly, hiding how her eyes burned. She had nothing left to sell, no family left to ask. Her husband died in a mining collapse 2 winters ago, and since then she had scrubbed floors, mended clothes, and taken every kind of honest work she could find. But this town had few opportunities for a widow with a child, less for a woman without land or protection. The knock came just after sunset. She opened the door and found herself face to face with a tall man in a dusty coat, a hat tipped low over dark blonde hair. His shirt was threadbare at the cuffs, but his boots were clean, and the saddlebag over his shoulder looked heavy. "Evening," he said. His voice carried the roughness of the trail, but not unkindness. "Name's Porter Dallen. I heard from the shopkeeper that a woman came in today, pawned a silver watch, said she looked about ready to fall over." Naomi stiffened. "Did you come to judge me, Mr. Dallen? Or buy the watch for yourself?" "No, ma'am," he said, shaking his head. "I came to return it." She blinked as he reached into his coat and pulled out the watch. Her husband's initials were still engraved on the back. She stepped back, wary. "Why would you do that?" He looked over her shoulder to where Sadie now stood in the doorway, clutching the edge of her mother's skirts. "Because no woman should have to give up the last piece of the man she loved just to feed her child. I've seen too much of that." "I do not like it." Naomi's throat closed. "I cannot take charity." "Then do not," he said simply. "Call it a promise." She stared at him. "A promise?" He crouched down and met Sadie's wide eyes with a gentle smile. "I was raised by a woman who never asked for help, even when she needed it most. She died with her pride, but I would have gladly given her the world if she had just let me. I cannot go back and fix that, but maybe I can do something right now." Naomi swallowed. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing," he said. "Just let me help. I am passing through, headed toward the Bitterroots come spring. Until then, I can work for my board, fix what needs fixing, chop wood, keep you both safe." She folded her arms. "And what would people say, a single man living under the same roof?" "I will sleep in the barn," he said. "Or out behind it, if that suits you better." Sadie tugged on Naomi's hand. "Mama, he smells like horses." Porter chuckled, eyes warming. "That I do, little one." Naomi hesitated, but the weight of survival pressed harder than propriety. Winter would come early this year. The wind already had bite to it. "You can sleep in the barn, and you will earn your keep," she said firmly. "No handouts here. That suits me just fine." By the second week, the woodpile had tripled in size, the roof no longer leaked, and Sadie had taken to following Porter around like a shadow. Naomi watched from the window as he hoisted beams with ease, his sleeves rolled up, skin bronzed from the sun. He was quiet, never asked questions about her past, never made her feel small. He simply worked, and every evening he left a fresh rabbit or a string of fish by the door. One night, as the first frost settled, she found him repairing the corral fence in the moonlight. "You should be inside," she said, pulling her shawl tighter. "I like the cold," he said, hammering a nail into place. "Reminds me I have blood in my veins." She stepped closer. "You did not have to buy that watch back." "I did," he set the hammer down, "because I saw the way you clutched it when you walked out of the shop, like it was your last breath." She looked down. "It was all I had left of him." "I know," he said quietly. "But you are not alone anymore." She lifted her eyes to his, the air between them sharp and still. "I do not know how to trust that," she whispered. "You do not have to yet," he said. "Just let me keep my promise." As autumn waned and snow flurried in the hills, Naomi found herself laughing more. Sadie's cheeks grew round again, and her giggles filled the house. Porter fixed the chimney, repaired the wagon wheel, and once surprised them both by carving Sadie a wooden horse. Naomi began to wait for his footsteps outside the door each evening. Her heart, once too tired to hope, now fluttered when she saw him. He never pushed, never crossed a line. But in the quiet, in the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, something gentle bloomed. One night after Sadie had fallen asleep, Naomi stepped onto the porch and found Porter staring up at the stars. "You never said why you are headed to the Bitterroots," she said. He glanced at her. "Looking for land, a place to build something of my own." She hesitated. "And will you leave when the snow melts?" His jaw tightened. "Only if I am still needed elsewhere." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "You are needed here." His eyes found hers, steady and full of heat. "I was hoping you would say that." And in the silence that followed, something shifted. Something real. Something that felt like the beginning of a life she never thought she would have again. The first snowfall came early, layering the fields and rooftops in a hush that swallowed sound. Naomi stood at the kitchen table, her hands dusted with flour, pressing dough into neat rounds for the morning's biscuits. Across the room, the fire in the hearth cracked softly, and the scent of rendered lard and dried sage warmed the air. Porter came in from the barn, kicking snow from his boots, his coat damp at the shoulders. He set down a pail with a clunk the morning's milk. Naomi didn't look up right away, but she caught the sound of his slow exhale. He was favoring his right leg. "You limping?" she asked, brushing her hands clean on her apron. "Just stiff," he said. "Horse spooked last night, caught my knee against the stall gate." She frowned. "You didn't say anything. Didn't seem worth saying." She crossed the floor and gestured to the bench. "Sit." "I'll wrap it." "I've had worse," he started, but one look from her ended the argument. He sat, and she knelt beside him, rolling up his trousers to the knee. The bruise spread like spilled ink across his skin. She worked in silence, binding the joint with strips of linen and a salve she'd made from pine resin and bear fat. His leg was warm beneath her hands, solid as the beams he'd raised. "You always do things alone?" she asked, tying the cloth snug. "Only ever had myself to count on," he said. "Till now," she glanced up at him, surprised by the quiet truth in his voice. "You were raised back east." "No, Arkansas, Ozark Edge. Pa drank himself into a grave before I was 10. Ma followed 2 winters after. I drifted a while. Cattle drives, fencing crews. No place stuck." She tied off the last knot and stood. "And now," he met her eyes. "Now I think I might have found somewhere I don't have to leave." She turned to the hearth, unsure what to do with the sudden warmth in her chest. She spooned another ladle of beans into the pot, their scent mingling with the pine smoke. "Sadie's been asking if you'll show her how to braid rope," she said. He stood carefully, testing the bandage. "I'll teach her after chores. She'll like that." She paused. "She's never had anyone to follow but me." He buttoned his coat again, his movements slow. "She's got grit, that don't come from me." Naomi didn't answer. She watched him pull on his gloves, his expression unreadable in the dim light, then his gaze lifted to hers. "You planning to stay through the thaw?" she asked, her voice quiet. "That depends," he said. "On whether I'm still welcome." She opened her mouth, then stopped. The words felt too big for the small room. Instead, she nodded once, slow and certain. That was enough. Later that evening, as snow thickened against the windows, Naomi found herself sitting across from him at the table while Sadie slept curled up beneath a quilt nearby. Porter had pulled out a worn deck of cards and dealt 2 hands. She didn't ask where he'd gotten them, just watched his hands move, sure and steady. "You ever think about running a place of your own?" he asked, not looking up from his cards. She considered. "I used to. Before, Amos had big plans, dryland wheat, maybe sheep. We thought about the Bozeman Trail, but he didn't make it that far." Porter set a card down. "You still could." "I don't have land. Land can be claimed. There's still homesteads opening west of here. Forested, hard work, but good soil." She looked at him carefully. "Why are you saying this?" "Because I'd rather build something beside someone who knows what loss feels like, someone who don't flinch from the truth." "And what would you want in return?" He met her gaze. "A place at your table, a stake in what we make." "Maybe a laugh now and then." She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "That sounds a lot like a future." It does, he said. You scared of that? I was, she said. But not right now. He smiled, not wide, not showy, just enough to crease the edge of his eyes. Then he gathered the cards and began to shuffle again. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, but inside the house, the air held steady. No promises spoken. None needed. Only the quiet understanding of two lives edging closer, drawn not by need but by the quiet certainty of choice. By early December, the land had fallen into its deep, frozen quiet. Snow lay heavy on the rooftops and fence rails, and the sun, when it came at all, cast long blue shadows across the yard. The woodpile had shrunk to half its height, but the house stayed warm, and Naomi's hands no longer trembled when she measured out flour or counted potatoes. Porter spent most days repairing harnesses and oiling tools in the shed behind the barn. Sadie had taken to sitting beside him on a stool, humming to herself as she twisted bits of twine or asked questions. He always answered straight. Naomi stood at the window one morning, watching them through the frost-glazed pane. Porter tilted his head as Sadie spoke, then tossed her a length of leather, letting her try a knot. The girl's shoulders straightened with pride. Naomi pressed her palm to the glass as her chest tightened, not with grief, but with something quieter, steadier. She hadn't expected it to feel like this. That afternoon, she found Porter splitting kindling near the porch. His breath clouded as he raised the axe and brought it down with practiced ease. "I had word from Mrs. Abbott," Naomi said, stepping down the steps with her shawl drawn close. He looked up, wiping his brow with the back of his glove. "She's moving back east to her sister's place in Missouri. Says the winters are too cruel here. Can't blame her," he said. "She's near 70. She offered me her hens before she goes. Says they still lay some, even in the cold. You thinking of taking them?" "I am, but I'll need to build a proper coop. The lean-to won't keep out coyotes." Porter nodded, setting the axe aside. "I'll draw up something sturdy. We have enough scrap wood if I plan it right." Naomi hesitated. "I've never kept hens before. You'll learn. You've got the kind of mind that doesn't turn away from the hard things." She looked down, her boot toe tracing the edge of a frozen rut. "Some days I feel like I'm still holding everything together with thread." "You're not," he said. "You're holding it with grit." She lifted her chin slightly. "That's not the same as ease." "No, but it lasts longer." That night, after Sadie had fallen asleep curled against the quilt, Naomi set a kettle to boil and pulled a tin of dried mint from the shelf. The leaves had been a gift from a Shoshone woman who passed through town last spring, and Naomi had rationed them carefully, saving them for nights that asked something more than heat. She poured 2 cups and carried one to where Porter sat near the fire, mending a set of reins. He looked up, surprised. "Mint, that's a rare thing." "I thought maybe," she said, handing it to him. "We'd earned it." He took the cup without a word, but his eyes lingered on hers longer than they ever had before. She sat in the chair across from him, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It stretched, comfortable and full. After a while, she asked, "What would you build if you had your land?" He didn't answer immediately. He turned the cup slowly, the steam curling beneath his nose. "A cabin," he said. "Simple, 1 room to start. Enough space for a table, some shelves, a place to hang coats. I'd plant something, maybe beans the first year, and I'd want a dog. A good one, quiet, smart." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like a man who doesn't want to live alone." "I don't," he said. "Not anymore." Naomi's hand stilled on her cup. "There's a homestead parcel opening near the river bend. I heard it from the blacksmith's boy. I know the place, south-facing slope, good light." She nodded. "I was thinking, if someone were to claim it, they'd need help getting it ready before spring." Porter set his cup down. His voice was steady. "I'd never ask you to leave your home for me." "I'm not leaving anything," she said. "This was always borrowed. I want roots I can plant with my own hands." He leaned forward slightly. "Naomi, I wouldn't take a step without knowing it was what you wanted." She met his gaze. "I want a life that doesn't feel like waiting for the next hardship. I want to wake up knowing someone's beside me who won't disappear when the snow melts." His voice dropped low. "Then let's go together. We'll file the claim, build it beam by beam." She nodded once, sure now. "We'll go before the thaw." He reached across the table and took her hand, rough fingers lacing gently with hers. The fire crackled between them, and outside, snow whispered against the shutters, soft and steady. Inside, the air had changed, not loud or sudden, but certain. Like something had settled into place that had always been meant to. The morning they left Dovetail, Naomi wrapped Sadie in a wool shawl and tucked her into the wagon beside a small crate holding 2 hens. The wagon boards had been patched with care, the axle greased just 2 days before. Porter tied down the last bundle of belongings, mostly tools, a kettle, and the folded canvas that would be their roof until they raised something better. The road west stirred under a pale sun, the snow packed hard from freighter wheels and cold enough to bite through leather. Naomi drove while Porter walked ahead, leading the mare slowly. Sadie dozed between jolts, her head against Naomi's hip. No one spoke much. It wasn't a time for words. By midday, they reached the edge of the parcel, a rise overlooking a bend of the river, with a grove of pine shielding the north edge and enough flat land to dream on. The snow here lay untouched, save for a single fox track weaving along the tree line. Porter turned, his breath fogging. "We'll set camp near the stand of spruce. That slope will keep the wind off." Naomi climbed down and lifted Sadie into her arms. "She'll need to stay warm while we work. I can make a lean shelter for her and the hens. I'll get the canvas stretched. After that, we mark the corners and start digging post holes." They worked until twilight. Naomi's fingers grew raw tying brush across the windbreak, and Porter's shoulders strained from hauling stone for the hearth's base. When they paused to eat, they shared the last of the smoked trout wrapped in cloth, biting through the cold with silent gratitude. That night, with Sadie bundled beneath layers of quilts and curled against Naomi's side, Porter kept watch by the fire. Naomi sat across from him, her cloak drawn tight, the flames catching in the strands of her hair. "You ever built a cabin from nothing?" she asked quietly. "Helped raise 3, none were mine." He glanced at the unfinished posts. "This one will be." She drew her knees up, shifting her weight slightly. "I always thought settling meant safety, but it feels more like standing still inside risk." "You're not wrong," he said. "But there's a kind of power in choosing the risk yourself." Sadie stirred, and Naomi reached to lay a hand on her back. "I used to think the world turned its back on women like me. Now I wonder if I just stopped asking it to look." "You didn't stop," he said. "You just got tired of shouting." She stared into the fire. "When Amos died, I wasn't sure what part of me was left. I lived for Sadie, but I wasn't living. Not really." Porter leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't owe me the telling. But I'll listen if you want to speak." Naomi's voice stayed low. He was kind, quiet, spent more time with books than men. The mine wasn't what he wanted, it was what paid. When it collapsed, they pulled out 7 bodies. He was the last they found. Porter said nothing. The crackling fire filled the silence, respectful and unhurried. "I kept his watch," she went on, "not for the time, just the weight of it, something solid, something that stayed." "I remember," he said. She looked at him then, truly looked. "You didn't ask anything of me, not once." "Why?" He held her gaze. "I've been turned away enough to know what grace looks like when it's offered." The firelight caught the side of his face, the faint line of an old scar along his jaw. For the first time, she realized how much he carried behind the quiet, not just grit, but restraint. "I don't know how to start again," she said. "You already did," he answered. "The day you stepped onto this land." Later, after the fire burned low, Naomi lay beside her daughter and listened to the wind move through the trees. Porter's shape was still visible at the edge of the shelter, his back to the cold, shoulders squared against whatever came next. She closed her eyes and let the warmth of his promise settle into her chest, not loud, not fast, but certain. Like the slow, steady build of something meant to last. By late January, the cabin walls stood shoulder high. Porter had notched every beam by hand, his hat pulled low and breath fogging in the air as he worked from dawn till dusk. Naomi hauled timber and hammered pegs until her hands burned. Sadie stayed near, helping where she could, stacking kindling, handing up nails, keeping the hens from wandering too close to the fire pit. One morning, Naomi stood back from the frame and brushed sawdust from her skirt. The sun had broken through for the first time in over a week, gilding the river below and catching in the frost-laced branches. "I never thought it'd look like this." she said quietly. Porter, holding a draw knife, paused mid-stroke. What you expect, a roof first, before walls. Something to huddle under. But this, it feels like the bones of something that'll stand longer than us. He rose, stretching his back. That's the idea. Naomi stepped toward the frame, trailing her fingers along the join between two beams. We'll need a root cellar before long. The ground's hard now, but come thaw we'll have to dig deep. I've been thinking the same, Porter said, wiping his hands on a rag. We can use stone from the creek. I'll start hauling it once the sled's fixed. She turned toward him. You always plan ahead. I've had winters surprise me before, he said. I've learned not to let them. Naomi watched him for a moment. What was the worst one? His jaw tensed slightly. Dakota Territory. Took work herding horses for a man outside Yankton. Cold came early. Food ran out before January. 2 of us made it through, 3 didn't. She didn't ask what he'd had to do to survive it. The silence between them said enough. Why keep going? She asked. Porter looked at her then, really looked. I kept thinking there had to be something better waiting. Some patch of land where a man could build and not be chased off. Some woman who'd look him in the eye and not flinch. Naomi stepped closer, her breath visible between them. You think you've found it? I know I have. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. Then let's finish this together. They hung the door late that week. Porter carved the lintel with a small chisel, nothing fancy, just a pine branch etched into the grain, looping around a 7-point star. Naomi stood beside him, watching the blade move, her hands folded beneath her shawl. Why the star? She asked. It's what I followed when I left everything else behind, he said, and what I found again here. The roof went up next, and with it, a chimney made from river stone and packed clay. Naomi lined the shelves with thick cloth and laid the iron kettle in its new place above the hearth. They moved their bedding inside, and for the first time since the wagon ride west, slept on wood they'd placed themselves. That night, the wind rose again, but inside the cabin, the fire held steady. Sadie lay curled with the hens in a small nook Naomi had stuffed with straw and wool scraps. Porter sat near the hearth, mending a split in his glove. Naomi poured water from the kettle into a tin mug and handed it to him. This house, she said. It's more than I ever thought I'd have again. He set the glove aside and looked up. It's not just yours, her voice faltered slightly. I know, he reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. Naomi, I never came here looking for a place to stop. I came looking for someone to build with. She met his hand, threading her fingers through his. Then build with me. He leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. I will. Every day you'll have me, and she did. They married in the spring, under the spruce trees, with Sadie holding a crown of woven grass and feathers she'd made herself. The river ran fast with meltwater, and the ground smelled of thawing earth and pine resin. Porter wore his cleanest shirt, the sleeves rolled just once, and Naomi wore her mother's brooch at her throat. There were no guests, just the 3 of them, and that was enough. By summer, the garden sprouted beans, onions, and squash. The hens nested steady, and a brindled dog wandered down from the hills and took to lying by the porch, his ribs thickening with every week of scraps and kind hands. Porter built a rocking bench outside the door, and in the evenings, he and Naomi sat there while Sadie played in the tall grass. They didn't speak much. Language wasn't needed between 2 people who had already lived through silence and chosen to stay. One night, Naomi rested her hand over his and said, I never thought I'd find this again. Porter turned to her, his voice low. You didn't find it. You made it, and she believed him. Years passed. The trees grew taller, the roof held firm, and when Sadie grew into a young woman, she planted an apple tree near the river bend. Naomi taught her to dry herbs for winter, and Porter showed her how to break a young horse with patience instead of force. In time, they added a second room to the cabin and a porch swing. Naomi kept the silver watch tucked in a drawer, not because she needed it anymore, but because it had led her to the life she never imagined she'd earn again. And every night, with the fire low and the wind brushing softly against the walls they had built, Porter wrapped an arm around the woman who had chosen to stay, and they slept side by side, in peace, in love, in the home they had made from nothing but strength, kindness, and time.